What does it really mean to be needy, right? We all have needs. We're all, being in a human body, your needs are a fact and not a flaw. And yet the cultural conversation that we have around needs and around neediness is so diminishing. We all have this idea in our minds of what that looks like, that hungry ghost, never satisfied, a burden on others. Neediness was always this thing that I had to contend with. And the more that I explored it, the more that I came to understand that what is neediness other than a desire to matter?
Hi, friends. Welcome. Welcome Sounds True One community for Insights at the Edge Live. I hope you'll stay with us for the after show and bring forward your questions. We have with us today Mara Glatzel. And Mara is someone who is an intuitive coach, writer, and podcast host who has done quite a bit of work to reclaim and redeem, this is my language, what it means to express our needs, to own our needs, to be needy. Here in her own words, she describes herself as a needy human who helps other needy humans stop abandoning themselves and start reclaiming their humanity through embracing their needs and honoring their natural energy cycles. With Sounds True, Mara Glatzel has written a new book. It's called Needy: How to Advocate for Your Needs and Claim Your Sovereignty. She's joining us from the tip of Cape Cod, Massachusetts. Mara, welcome.
Hi, thank you. Thanks so much for having me. So excited to be here.
By way of introduction, share a bit with our listeners how focusing on being needy came to be such a theme for you, both in a blog you began to write and then a podcast you began to host, and now your first book.
I think that of all of the things that I was told not to be, that I was warned against becoming, needy stood front and center. It was the thing that you learn stands between you and the belonging that you ache for, between you and the relationships that you want to have, between you and the success that you hope for. And this idea of being needy or having needs, because what does it really mean to be needy, right? We all have needs. We're all, being in a human body, your needs are a fact and not a flaw. And yet the cultural conversation that we have around needs and around neediness is so diminishing. And we all have this idea in our minds of what that looks like, that hungry ghost, never satisfied, a burden on others. And when I started to work to take up space in my own life and to bring more of myself into my relationships and into my work, neediness was always this thing that I had to contend with. And the more that I explored it, the more that I came to understand that what is neediness other than a desire to matter and a desire to receive care from yourself and from others, to exist and have requirements for your relationships. And the more that I turned those things over, the less I could see a problem with any of it. And so this book seeks to kind of talk about that tongue-in-cheek. Lately, I've been saying that it's convenient because if the title does something to you, you can know that it's a book that's for you. And it does something for me. That is that, neediness is that thing that you really don't want to be, and why.
Let's talk about that. Why is it so hard? And I think it is hard for many of us to, first of all, begin by identifying what our needs are, and then to say them out loud and advocate for them and ask for them. And I mean, this is tough. I know as I was reading the book and I was starting to go through the different categories that you describe: needs for safety, needs for rest, needs for sustenance. I started adding my own categories, need for creativity, need for meaning. And I was like, I think I'm just going to lie down right now, me and all my needs, that the actual life I have and my needs, they're not necessarily 100% together. So, and that's very uncomfortable. It's a very uncomfortable feeling to start recognizing how many needs I have that aren't actually being met in my day-to-day life. But I'm curious your view, why for so many of us, even just starting to say, you want to know what my needs are, it makes us, a little off of our center.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I think that there's two reasons for that. The first is that we don't have a working vocabulary for what is even possible to need. And this is one of the reasons that ultimately I wanted to write Needy, because I found that, Laverne Cox talks about possibility models. And I didn't have a possibility model for what I was even allowed to ask for, what I was even allowed to name within my own yearning. And so by beginning to explore it and having conversations on my podcast and then in the book, these words started to emerge. And that's really important for us to have answers that come to mind. Because for me, when somebody would say, well, what do you need? I didn't even know what was on the table. I didn't even know what I was allowed to ask for. I didn't grow up with people who were talking about their needs. I didn't find them in any workplace environment that I had occupied. I didn't talk about them in my relationships. And so not knowing what is reasonable to ask for is one facet of why we don't ask for what we need. The other, of course, is all of the stories that we carry about what it means to have needs. And these stories begin so early in our lives. And I started doing this work, pivoting from self-care to thinking about needs in particular, after the birth of my first child, because there I was, not knowing how to parent, barely having a second to think about anything or have any needs met. And I was supposed to give her what she needed. And it struck me how many misunderstandings there are and how many misinterpretations there are that start at the very beginning of our lives when it comes to asking for what we need, where we might ask and somebody might be rightfully overwhelmed. And that will be about them and it's not about us, but we take it personally and we collect these different moments in our lived experience and begin to weave it together into this story that says, my needs are a burden. My needs are too much. My needs overwhelm the people around me. I shouldn't ask for what I need. And that not asking for what you need is almost an act of service to your relationships. And of course, there are other stories too that grow out of, our families of origin that have to do with neediness. But I think that no matter what your experience of having needs out loud is, we all share a significant amount of personal experience when it comes to asking for what we need. And so we may move into two categories where either we're classically needy, we just can't help ourselves, we have too many feelings, too many thoughts, too many needs, it's too much. Or we kind of batten down the hatches and we say, well, I'm not going to have needs. That doesn't work for me. And so we work as hard as we can to suppress them. But no matter how hard we try, we're never going to not have needs. And so what I did in Needy was make the argument for what happens when we take radical responsibility for our needs. What happens when we have this vocabulary, when we begin to identify our needs in our relationship with ourselves and start to advocate for them in our other external relationships? Because what I've found is that neediness that we think of only happens when we suppress what we're aching for, what we're yearning for such a long time, that of course then we lose it over something small, or we make too much out of something that really has nothing to do with what we're actually upset about. And so the more that we're able to be in conversation with ourselves, the more that we're able to advocate for what we really need in our relationships, the better it feels to have needs.
You talk about identifying our needs as something we can do as a daily practice. And I wonder if you can share that with listeners who are joining us and are thinking, I don't even know exactly where to start here. We're talking about a bigger vocabulary. I don't have much of a vocabulary right now.
Well, I think this starts with the fact that we don't have a big vocabulary oftentimes for our feelings. And so when we're thinking about where to start, the best place that I know is to start by talking to yourself. And I do mean just talking to yourself as if you're talking to somebody else, right? Because if you think, you already know how to build a relationship. You say hi, you say, how are you? You wait, you care to hear the answer. You're patient, you're engaged. And yet we often don't offer that same kindness to ourselves. We kind of like, hey, how are you? It's that hi that you say in the grocery store or something where you don't really want the other person to answer. You're just like, keep on moving. Okay, all right. And so when you're checking in with yourself, and I like to do this first thing in the morning because it changes the way that I approach my day, the answer to these questions. And so I might say, hey, how's it going? How are you feeling today? And how are you feeling takes multiple forms. And I grab for whatever comes easiest, whatever's sort of at the top for me. And that might be, how am I physically feeling? How's my body feeling? Or it might be that I notice immediately that I'm waking up feeling anxious or worried or overwhelmed. And then I move into asking myself, what do I need? Which is really based on that feeling. It's like, okay, you're feeling anxious. What do you need? Which is another way of saying, how can I support you today? And this is me talking to me. And it is true. You may at any given time have more needs than you're able to contend with. And that's a fact. I have 2 children under the age of 6. I have a dog. My life is really busy. And I'm not always able to meet all of my needs, but too often we make that mean, well, then I can't meet any of my needs. Then I need to go without. Then I'm stuck in this pattern of putting my care on the other side of whatever it is that's in front of me at the time. And that we do that naturally every once in a while. But what is harmful is when we get stuck in that pattern of always putting our needs on the other side of something, because we'll continue to find something to put our needs on the other side of. And so by having that conversation, noticing, hey, I'm a little overwhelmed by how many needs I have. And I like to ask, what is doable for me today? Or what am I ready, able, and willing to do to meet my needs today? And that doable aspect gives me permission to not have to do it all, to be able to meet myself in small ways and to remind myself that that matters. So whether that's getting more rest or making sure that I'm hydrating, or, today I knew that I was going to have to stay up all day and stay up late into the night and talk to you. And when I was checking in with myself this morning, that was the most important part of my day. So all of the other parts of my day kind of lead into how I wanted to feel in this moment. And it's just a way of being in conversation with yourself. And I can't stress enough that this is a transferable skill. We all already know how to talk to people. And it's learning how to talk to yourself and learning that talking to yourself on a daily basis matters.